Welcome back to the IBFP. Here's your host, Foxy New.
Welcome back, fight fans. Welcome back to the IBFP, where we tell you the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. And look, let's just go ahead and break down the Raw Truth Q&A. And we start with Artist Duran. He states, what do you think of the Charlo brothers charging $80 for a pay-per-view? Laughing out loud. And when you look at the fights of the Charlo brothers, you look at Jason Rosario versus Jermell Charlo. And when you break that fight down, you see Jason Rosario, he is a unified champion. So, there is a unification fight happening. So I think that is a good fight, but it's not a great one, and this is why it's not a great fight, because Jason Rosario has already been knocked out by a guy who's a journeyman, a guy in his last 5 fights who's lost 4 out of his last 5 fights. Knocked out Jason Rosario. See, this is the type of stuff that people won't tell you. This is the type of stuff the media won't tell you. And this guy also had a draw with another journeyman. So a guy who's been knocked out by a journeyman, a guy who's had a draw with another journeyman, and a guy who has, defensive deficiencies going up against Jermell Charlo, this fight is not pay-per-view worthy. Then when you look at Jermall Charlo versus, Sergey Derevyanchenko, and you look closely at that fight, you see Sergey Derevyanchenko coming off a war with Gennady Golovkin, Triple G. You also see the fact that, Jermall Charlo is only taking this fight because he thinks that, Sergey Derevyanchenko is at a disadvantage because he's coming off of a tune-up fight. So we got to be real. This is a good fight. It's a competitive fight, and I think it's a 50-50 fight. But this isn't a unification fight. This isn't a legacy-defining fight. This is a Sergey Derevyanchenko coming off a war, Charlo coming off a tune-up. There's excitement around this fight only because Jermall Charlo is finally fighting a legitimate threat. This is the type of fight, and this, that guys like Canelo and Anthony Joshua take all the time. So why are we overpraising Jermall Charlo for taking a fight that he should have already been taking 1,000 times? It doesn't make any sense. This is not a pay-per-view worthy fight. We got to be real about it. The cards are solid. The fights are solid. It's all a good card. It's all good fights, but they're not great. And great is pay-per-view worthy type of attraction. And these guys aren't worth $75. Showtime is taking a risk by putting this on pay-per-view at such a large amount. Great question. The next one comes from Mr. Cheesehead B, and he says, PBC apologist channels have been exposed because of the glove gate scandal, the cracked skull, poison in water, floppy glove gate, loaded gloves, all that BS. How will Wilder answer to his over-the-top biased man fans? And then, I think Deontay Wilder's going to answer the same way he always does, with idiocy, with being stupid, with delusion. And what I mean by that is Deontay Wilder has even come out and stated that he don't even see Tyson Fury as a champion. Now, how can't you see a guy who beat you up and stopped you as a champion is beyond me. Deontay Wilder is not a gracious winner, and he's much less far from being a gracious loser. At the end of the day, the guy, he was mad at Mark Breland for throwing in the towel, saving his life in that fight. So you can't expect Deontay Wilder to separate himself from all these idiotic man fans. More than likely, he's just going to feed into it. Great question. The next question comes from Big L, and Big L states, show us how Canelo Alvarez has it arranged so he never has to make mandatory defenses against a real fighter. It's called modern day ducking. And this is why I like Big L, because he comes with the hard questions, and I like to debunk them each and every time. And so, if Canelo Alvarez won his most recent mandatories for the IBF with Sergey Derevyanchenko, but you recently saw that Canelo Alvarez, after Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, Triple G, and Caleb Plant all rejected a fight with Canelo Alvarez offered Sergey Derevyanchenko a fight for millions of dollars, a career-high payday, and yet Sergey Derevyanchenko turned that offer down from Canelo Alvarez. So if he's ducking a mandatory, why did he offer it to Sergey Derevyanchenko twice? It doesn't make sense. Okay, what about Jermall Charlo, who was his mandatory for the WBC? He offered him a shot. He offered him a fight, a career-high payday again. And Jermall Charlo turned down that opportunity. So who exactly is Canelo Alvarez ducking? And I understand why they call you Big L, because that's all you take is L's. But let's just keep it going. The next one comes from Gadnook, and he states, do you think that, after Terence Crawford beats Kell Brook, he's going to do something more stupid, like give Mean Machine the rematch? Well, look, let's just break this down. Terence Crawford, according to the Lance Pugmire and Mike Coppinger podcast, stated that he was unwilling to even think about, to even talk about taking a pay cut to fight Shawn Porter or Keith Thurman. So if he was unwilling to even think about or approach the situation to take a fight with Keith Thurman or Shawn Porter by taking a pay cut, if he was unwilling, these are his words, he was unwilling to take the pay cut to even negotiate these fights. So at the end of the day, if he's unwilling to take a pay cut to negotiate those fights, what do you think's going to change after he beats Kell Brook? I don't think anything's going to change. And I don't see how he makes a fight with Manny Pacquiao, because you already see that Manny Pacquiao was even on the Top Rank side. They couldn't make the fight. They couldn't make the fight most recently. Manny Pacquiao is just too expensive for Top Rank. That's just really what it is. They're unable to come up with the right amount of money. And if Terence Crawford is still waiting on, a guy like Errol Spence, that makes no sense, because Shawn Porter has recently come out and stated that Al Heyman told him he will fight the winner of Errol Spence versus Danny Garcia. So it looks like for Errol Spence, the easy road continued. So at the end of the day, Terence Crawford doesn't have any other fights against any other top welterweights that sit on the PBC side, because one, he's not willing to negotiate, and two, they're fighting each other. So at the end of the day, Terence Crawford's only other options are on Top Rank right now, and those would be fights like Jose Ramirez, a unified champion at 140 pounds. If he's successful in a unification fight against Josh Taylor, that'll be a fight they'll match up, Terence Crawford with. Even Terence Crawford come out and said, I will crush Jose Ramirez at 147. It's that simple. And, this is what Top Rank is building. You also see, Josh Taylor coming out and saying, I'm more than able to upset Terence Crawford at 147 pounds. So if Josh Taylor or Jose Ramirez is successful when these guys fight for undisputed, whoever the guy comes out on top when the smoke clears, that's who Terence Crawford is likely going to be lined up to face next, because it looks like any of those PBC fights simply just are not happening. Great question. The next one comes from the BKS661. Turiano Johnson or Jaime Munguia, who do you got and why? Well, when you look at Turiano Johnson, this is a guy that's already been stopped twice in his career. So he has 2 losses, and both by knockout. He's a legitimate top 10 fighter. He does have some skills at 160 pounds. So Turiano Johnson is a good test for a guy like Jaime Munguia, who's looking to grow, improve, and get experience. But at the same time, I have to pick Jaime Munguia by knockout, and this is why. Jaime Munguia has already showcased elite type of power. Jaime Munguia has already shown improved defense, head movement, offensive variety. He's already shown these improvements if you've been watching his fights. A lot of people watch an old fighter, Jaime Munguia, bypass it. They don't realize he's been making steady improvements fight by fight. And, the reason why is because he has a Hall of Fame Mexican legend in his corner in Eric Morales. That's what's helping Jaime Munguia get better fight by fight by fight. I got Jaime Munguia by stoppage in that fight. I think it's going to be some difficult rounds for Munguia, attempting to cut the ring off against a guy like Turiano Johnson. So I don't think it'll be easy, but I think he'll eventually get the job done and get the victory in dramatic fashion. Great question. The next one comes from Luis Campos, and he states, do you think the Dillian Whyte versus Alexander Povetkin rematch will be just like the Joshua Ruiz rematch, where Dillian Whyte completely dominates and outboxes Alexander Povetkin like Joshua did with Ruiz? And, that's an excellent question, and I'll take you back to the fight first. And, when we go back to the fight, you see that Alexander Povetkin stopped Dillian Whyte in dramatic fashion, and that seems to be everything that people can only talk about. But people always forget what happened at the beginning of the fight, where Dillian Whyte was dominating this guy, had the guy out pretty much, and all he needed was just to put his foot on the gas and get him out of there. Theoretically, if the ref was being generous, he would have stopped the fight earlier. So when you look at the situation and the fact that Dillian Whyte had this guy hurt multiple times in the fight earlier before he got stopped, I think Dillian Whyte's going to come out, ensue and pursue maximum violence and dominate Povetkin and stop him early. I don't think he's going to take any chances or risk. This man's career, title shot, and reputation are all on the line, and he's a young prime fighter. I think he puts his foot on the gas and gets rid of Povetkin. Great question. The next one comes from Peter123, and he states, what did you think when Billy Joe Saunders said he's suffering from depression after all the trouble, with the heroin addict girl? He tried to get her to punch some stranger for a bag of heroin. Makes him think that he said it to get out of the trouble, like Tyson Fury did in his situation. And you know what? That's a great point, Peter. And this is what I mean by it. Billy Joe Saunders has already popped dirty, for a drug stimulant, a banned drug stimulant. And, we've also seen Tyson Fury pop dirty for a banned anabolic steroid. And, Tyson Fury came out and, refused to take the Vladimir Klitschko rematch, basically stating that, hey, I have depression, I have mental issues. Well, one of the main side effects for that particular anabolic steroid is depression, is those same mental issues. So I'm not saying he did or didn't, but the evidence looked likely that he did. It's all alleged at this point, but it looks like both of these guys popped dirty. Both of these guys are suspect at this point. But once again, this is the IBFP, unbiased as always.